So, roughly a year ago, the world was graced by Sonic Frontiers, the latest main series 3D Sonic game from Sonic Team. This game came after a 5-year gap between it and the previous game, Sonic Forces. That game failed to deliver in many ways that I don't want to spend too much time on today because I did a decently long Sonic Forces video last year that said just about everything I need to say about that mess. Sonic Frontiers promised to be a much bigger game than they'd done in recent memory with a larger world and more to do in it. And it might even tell a story this time. This had a lot of people really hyped for it, to say the absolute least, but in the eyes of the mainstream, Sonic Frontiers caught a lot more attention than any Sonic game had in over 10 years. Perhaps the promise of fighting huge bosses as Super Sonic and speeding through massive overworlds just seemed cooler than any recent offering. But regardless of whatever the reason is, Sonic Frontiers is one of the highest rated and best-selling Sonic games of the last 10 years. Since this game, seemingly, was everything I claimed to have wanted from Sonic, a lot were expecting my review of it to be super positive. And the video I ended up doing left people disappointed. Some even said it was that way because it was rushed. And I will admit, from the moment I installed the game on my PS5 to the moment the video released was a span of like 82 hours. So I can see why people would feel that way. And I would say to a certain extent the video was rushed, and that is why it was as positive as it was. And that was not a joke. That video was me trying my damnedest to look at the bright side, while showing off how much I didn't like a lot of the game. I even gave it a 5 out of 10 at the end, which was also me trying to be nice. There are games I thought were pretty much perfect, and I don't think Sonic Frontiers is half as good as those games, so therefore my giving it a 5 was an attempt at being kind. Though I did consider giving it a 6 at one point. But that doesn't matter right now. The point of this video is that it has now been a year since Sonic Frontiers released, and we've gotten 3 waves of free DLC for it. In that year, I've had time to think about it without having played the game at all or any of its new content, so I thought now would be a good time to go back to Sonic Frontiers and see if I was, in fact, too harsh or too kind on this game. Let's start with the positives, because there are things I said that were good about this game that I didn't gush over nearly enough. Or really, just one thing. The music. I said I liked the music in my video from last year, but in the time since, I think I can say it's absolutely one of my favorites in the franchise. I was thinking it might be recency bias, but Undefeatable, Break Through It All, Find Your Flame, and I'm Here are songs I listen to somewhat often without getting sick of them. Numerous vocal themes throughout Sonic history are iconic in the realm of video games, but I think the boss themes in Sonic Frontiers are just really good songs. If the recent Sonic Symphony concert tour is anything to go by, these songs also became instantly iconic too. The cyberspace themes are also ones I've gone back to for background noise a lot over the last year. I really like the music in Sonic Frontiers, and I think the new music added for the Final Horizon update makes for a great listen as well. Shifting gears to the gameplay, I said it before and I'll say it again. It's great that there are sliders in the options so you can customize things like the acceleration. Every player is going to have a different idea of how it should handle, and so developers including options to tweak the experience to your liking is a great thing. Like last year, I just turned almost everything to max, and that's how I enjoyed it the most. Even though many people thought my control issues with this game were caused by this, despite the original video complimenting the game for this fact. No, what I complained about were things baked into the game, like how Sonic had this ludicrously unnatural jump where you, regardless of whatever speed you were going at, would lose all of it by jumping. Something you can verify just by looking at the speedometer in the bottom right of the screen. When jumping, it just snapped back to near zero, and as a result, I thought the game felt super limp to play when running around. This was actually addressed, finally, in Update 2 earlier this year. Sliders were added for Sonic's deceleration, and as a result, you can now carry your speed into jumps. I don't know how that wasn't in the game before. I mean, it's basic physics, and countless games have it, including Sonic games that came before this one, but still, it was nice that they listened to feedback and implemented this. The grand prize for completing all the content in Update 2 is the Spin Dash. With a press of a button, Sonic will go flying and fly off of inclines. This doesn't work with proper momentum. Like, you don't gain more speed by going downhill and lose it by going up. It's more of a boost. But I can't say I mind either way. I just think being able to go fast and fly off of things makes Sonic Frontiers significantly more fun than it ever was before. A large quantity of fans have defended the game from my criticism that you don't get to go fast and go flying in the overworld by saying that it would break the game, and like, yeah, that's the idea. It's an open world Sonic game. Who doesn't want to just fly around like this? It is the thing that Sonic does. I just thought the handling of this game was its biggest issue last year, and I think the game has been more enjoyable with these new additions. The Spin Dash requires a lot of effort to unlock with these score trials in every island, but if you played it on PC as I did, one trip to the mod loader's cheat list will let you unlock the Spin Dash from the start, and I have absolutely no shame in admitting that. In the base game, all the control options did not apply to cyberspace levels, only the open world portions. Because of this, I thought cyberspace played in an even more limp way than the open world because you had to play with the default control settings. I really hated cyberspace as a result because I thought the movement was stiff and slow. Thankfully, with Update 2, all the control sliders in the Spin Dash now apply to cyberspace, and these levels become way more enjoyable as a result. You can zoom off of inclines with the spin dash, or just jump with a high speed for distance, and I think it can be really cool. You also have to play somewhat normally if you want to complete each of the stage's objective list, which nets you the most vault keys, which are needed for progression, so the new features definitely don't break cyberspace. And yeah, those are the ways in which my opinion on Sonic Frontiers has improved since last year. But to rip the band-aid off, that wasn't enough to make me think Sonic Frontiers was a good or fun game. So let's talk about it. What do you do in Sonic Frontiers? Well, in 4 of the 5 islands, you run around fighting bosses to collect gears that allow you to get into cyberspace, where you collect vault keys for completing objectives, and vault keys allow you to collect Chaos Emeralds, and when you get them all, you can be supersonic and destroy the Titan that patrols that island, and then you move on to the next one. While on the island, you do mini objectives to expand the map and collect trinkets that let you access more cutscenes or upgrade your stats. And that is precisely what the game was last year and still is now. Fundamentally, I don't think the gameplay loop of Sonic Frontiers is enjoyable. The spin dash makes it so that traveling across the open area is significantly more fun than it ever was when the game first released, which is a positive, but the content you're traveling all this way to do is just something I don't find fun. I think the open zones are really chaotic because the level design is littered with platforms and grind rails suspended in the sky with little visual cohesion, and oftentimes the game will just force you into an automated path sending you off target from where you were trying to get to. Made worse when you get to Chaos Island and the developers start loading the island up with 2D sections that further restrict your freedom and exploration. With these rapid camera angle shifts and automated sequences, regardless of having the spin dash, I don't think this is a fun world to play in or explore. But then the content you're going to still doesn't hold much water for me. The tasks and puzzles you solve in the overworld are really basic, like following a path or quick-stepping rapidly in place or putting Tetris blocks together. It just doesn't offer me anything fun to do in the map. The combat system may involve this list of moves you unlock with skill points, but I think the combat falls flat in its face because none of it is necessary or really that useful. Pretty much every attack is a button combo that starts a cinematic animation where Sonic will do the attack, and some of them can be cool, I guess, but oftentimes I just think it's limp anyway because of the sound effects, and because of how sometimes you'll not even be hitting the enemy and they'll be taking damage. It's just lame from a feedback perspective, but then from a depth perspective it doesn't work. I've defended simple combat mechanics before, but this is just too simple and also masks its simplicity with a bunch of options that feel pretty meaningless. Here's how you can approach every combat scenario in Sonic Frontiers. Spam the spinning leg kick until you unlock the hand beam attack later in the game. This shreds through enemy health bars like it's nothing, and if they have a shield up, side-loop them and then you can do the attacks I just said. Sometimes it is good to get up close though and do the sweeping tornado attack, but other than that, I don't really feel like the other options are that important. In a game like Devil May Cry, you have this big move pool, but you need to use these moves because the style and grading system only values variety and tactics, not spam. Even though you could spam the same attack if you wanted to, which wouldn't even be that fun because using all the moves is better. In Frontiers, I don't feel any incentive to use different moves, and I don't find it that much more interesting to do that. In a game like Batman Arkham, you have to choose between moving really fast when you have a high hit combo or using one of your combo finishers to take a guy out or destroy his weapon. In Spider-Man, you build up the focus meter and have to choose between taking a guy down with a combo attack or refilling your health bar. In just about every good combat-heavy game, I can think of ways in which more depth is provided, including Sonic Unleashed, I might add. Combat is way faster and more satisfying in that game than in Sonic Frontiers. The biggest killer of all is the parry system, or lack thereof. You hold 2 buttons and Sonic will automatically block any incoming attack, rendering the entire system moot because it doesn't require any skill to engage with. Maybe that could have been a setting in the options, but the fact that this is just how the counter system works just never made sense to me. The thing that makes Royal Guard satisfying in DMC or parrying in Metal Gear Rising or Spider-Man 2 or Resident Evil 4 Remake is specifically the fact that it takes some degree of skill or timing to get right. Frontiers just doesn't have that, so it's boring. But then the game is seemingly at odds with itself as there are timed parry challenges like it's DMC 1, as if the game isn't completely broken in this regard. Now, what someone might be typing in the comments is that in the Final Horizon update you get moments where perfect parrying is required, and this, in my opinion, just shined a light in the fact that the attacks from the bosses, Wyvern especially, were not designed with this in mind, so it becomes pretty frustrating to guess when you should block. So no matter how I look at the combat, I think it misses the mark. That is a majority of the gameplay loop, but then in cyberspace, while it's better than it was before because we have the spin dash and jumping physics, I don't think these levels are lame. They have visually repetitive theming as they cycle between the same 4 level aesthetics, 3 of which reuse assets from Sonic Generations for the dozenth time, and then half of them recycle exact level designs from Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Unleashed, and Sonic Generations. I just think it's lame. With new control additions, I still think most recycled cyberspace levels are poor man's versions of the original stages they borrowed from, and new ones are also pretty forgettable and easy with a couple of exceptions. So like I said, the core gameplay loop of exploring, fighting, and running through cyberspace levels are all things I don't really care for, which means the game can't win that many points with me. There are a number of open world games I enjoy significantly more than this, a plethora of action games I like far more than Frontiers, and a boatload of Sonic games I also enjoy more than this too. I unfortunately just don't like this game. The presentation being a mess doesn't help either. The visuals in this game are far below the bar of modern games, reusing assets from PS3 era games. And so the game just feels like a PS3 or a 360 game, just minus the terrible performance. The PS5 can totally do a next-gen Sonic game in terms of visuals and spectacle, but that isn't what we got. While you play it, it'll be utterly impossible to not notice geometry popping in with the subtlety of a brick to the face. This can sometimes affect gameplay since portions of the levels will load in as you come across it. I just think this game is unappealing on a visual note. The animation also leaves a lot to be desired. Best example to look at are these boss fights. They're meant to be the hypest parts of the game where Super Sonic tackles these giant machines, but in practice it's a mess because you just mash buttons or just spam the stomp move and see the health bar drain. But then the animation just does not sell the moment. Sonic is not touching this laser. Sonic's not holding this sword he uses to finish off Knight. Sonic snaps between poses with no animation, and the list goes on. I've played Metal Gear Rising. The animations being so good is part of the spectacle, and this game lacks that. Then the cutscenes also have some of the stiffest animation in Sonic history. Characters stand and stare at each other with less life in their eyes than a Five Nights at Freddy's animatronic, and the game also has almost no action scenes to speak of, ones we get being really underwhelming because of the stiff animation. In my original video, I was told it was unfair to compare it to games like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart from Insomniac Games, but I still totally think Sonic could reach a bar this high if they wanted to. But I also brought up how Frontiers can't reach the bar of Jak and Daxter on PlayStation 2, and that was also apparently unfair. It is literally a game from over 20 years ago. Okay, but fine. Maybe that game had more resources put into it than Frontiers. That would be really sad, but maybe it's true. Then in that case, look at a game like Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. It was definitely a lower budget title, and yet it runs circles around this game in graphics, in animation, and in art design. It's a cartoon. Animate the characters, make them appealing to watch. This game just doesn't do it. It can't reach the cinematic heights of games like Sonic Lost World and Sonic Forces. I just think it's a total downgrade in presentation quality. But through it all, the first two islands are okay enough to get through, but I just don't want to play anymore by the time I get to Chaos Island. As I said, this is the island where the game starts frequently locking you into 2D sections at seemingly random, and the whole island is separated by massive chasms that make you take the scenic route across and have the blandest visuals in the game with cloudy skies and muddy brown textures on the ground. Also forcing you to play this really long pinball minigame to fight the boss fight at the end. By this point, I'm just getting bored of the game's routine. And then Rhea Island isn't a full level, instead being a series of tower climbs where bizarre glitches happened, in a game where weird shit still happened to me on the regular. And then I get to Uranos Island where I, on both my first playthrough last year and now, just stopped by the Biggs fishing game and cashed in all my accumulated purple coins to get all the vault keys needed to get the emeralds immediately so I don't have to fight the tougher enemies to gain access to more cyberspace stages. The fact that there even is a system to just bypass content like that is something you can debate being good or bad design, but I do put it to good use when I play through this game, so I guess I can't complain too much. All this gameplay serves a story that also doesn't land for me, mainly because I don't think the game tells much of a story at all. It certainly puts more emphasis on the story than any Sonic game has past Unleashed and Black Knight, but it mostly is just conversation after conversation about what might be going on in this island. While the game seemingly pats itself on the back for its ability to reference past games and/or wink to the audience about how we know Tails was poorly written in Sonic Forces and how we promise he won't be like that in the next game. So therefore, I find the interactions between Sonic and his established cast of friends to be really boring. The only arc is for Sage, Eggman's new sidekick and daughter figure. But her arc can be boiled down to a couple of bullet points. On Kronos Island, she doesn't like Sonic and wants to kill him. On Ares Island, she does the same. On Chaos Island, she learns that Sonic has the true power of friendship and this can help the Doctor escape cyberspace. And on Uranos Island, she's now working with Sonic as they all need to team up to stop the real villain. But that story is stretched across a 10-hour game, when I don't think there's 10 hours of story to tell. The part where she has an emotional flashback of her scenes with Eggman is also one of the most unintentionally funny parts of the game because it's just replaying scenes where absolutely nothing is happening but them standing in cyberspace to the tune of this weird-ass song. I don't really buy into the Eggman of older games ever reaching this conclusion with one of his creations to begin with. I mean, this guy told Gamma that the other E-series robots were his brothers in Sonic Adventure 1, and then made them fight each other and used the loser for scrap metal. Maybe he's changed, but the previous game was the one where he took over the world. The game just does not make any of it feel natural despite trying to tell a story in this one. It also builds up to things like Sonic getting cyber corrupted only to resolve that with a magic friend circle in 2 seconds. The plot heavily resembles Zelda Breath of the Wild, where the main game takes place in a destroyed civilization and you gradually piece together what happened as the foes you face in the present were meant to stop a bigger bad guy that won in the end. Only, in Zelda, they make those flashbacks relevant to the character you're playing as and the people around him, and in this game, I can't say any of it ever mattered to me because there isn't a reason to care. I just think this game has a boring story. One that bogs everything down with references, some that make sense and others that really don't, to distract from how little is going on. But these are all basically the things I said a year ago. What people really wanted to hear my thoughts on was the Final Horizon update, which released back in September. As I said earlier, I didn't play the various updates as they came out because content like an Enemy Rush mode or a New Game Plus mode didn't really entice me to play it. But the Final Horizon update promised some new story content, so it got fans pretty interested. You'll beat Rhea Island and be sent to Uranos Island and can walk into a portal and experience a completely new take on the ending because the original finale got a lukewarm response. For both reasons I said already, and for ones I'll get into in a second. But in this new version of the ending, you'll play as Amy, Knuckles, and Tails trying to help Sonic gather the emeralds while he faces the trials required to learn new skills to fight the end. The reason I built up the reasons I don't like Frontiers fundamentally before talking about the Final Horizon was because, unfortunately, it all still applies. As Tails, Amy, and Knuckles, you explore the areas having to unlock new moves in the skill tree while platforming on geometry that feels completely out of place that pops in like crazy while gathering trinkets to advance. As Sonic, you do more combat in cyberspace and I don't enjoy playing it. It's more Sonic Frontiers, and if you enjoy the base game, you're gonna enjoy the new update, but I fundamentally don't like Sonic Frontiers and therefore I don't find this fun to play. One could say, yeah, but you're playing as these characters for the first time in a 3D game in well over a decade. Sure, that is true. But the issues I have with games like Forces or Frontiers aren't the lack of playable characters, it's more fundamental design concerns. So therefore, I'm not that excited about the prospect of playing as different characters in a game I don't really like that much. The DLC also just does things I find completely unnecessary that drag the entire thing down. Like how the final challenge before the new final battle is a boss rush. Literally my least favorite trope in video games. Needlessly repeated content to pad the runtime, only this is the most agonizing boss rush I've ever seen, and yes, that includes Mega Man X7. You have to fight Giganto, Wyvern, and Knight only with 400 rings that cannot be refilled. Wyvern is a boss where you spend most of it chasing after the thing, not getting to attack, so it's here where I lost a lot of rings, which doesn't leave you much time to beat Knight. When you lose, you go back to Giganto, and along the way you need to replay this Wyvern chase that lasts over 2 minutes, where you just run forward on a quick-step path. The night this came out, I watched people struggle with this for over an hour, and I couldn't believe the game would include such an obvious pace killer. But then they redid the final boss, too. In the original version of the game, you battle a titan called Supreme on Uranos Island, and if you played on normal or easy mode, this is the final boss. But you could only play the true final boss on hard mode. The true final battle against the end was this Ikaruga shooting minigame, and I thought it was one of the most out-of-left-field Sonic final bosses ever. Since you barely used this mechanic before, and now it's the basis of a bullet hell final boss where you can only take 2 hits before having to do it again. So because that was poorly received, we have a new final boss. First, you fight Supreme exactly as it was before, the easiest titan in the game by far, but also one of the worst designed too. Last year I complained that I got stuck here because of a part where you stopped doing damage. Folks were quick to point out that this was because I was a level 19 in combat. But that actually isn't what I was talking about. I literally meant that I had no idea what was going on when I wasn't able to do damage, ran out of rings, and respawned with only 100 rings, and still didn't know why that was happening and kept dying. The answer is that when he stops taking damage, you have to destroy one of his prisms and then you can resume the beatdown. What an idiot I am for my inability to predict that. But after Supreme, you get a new battle with the end where it commands the Supreme Mech, and Sonic gets a flashy new transformation, and I honestly think I'd take the Ikaruga battle over the new one. At least it was simpler and was kind of epic with the voiceover from the end and the sick music. But this was everything I didn't like about Supreme multiplied, and when you die you have to fight Supreme again, I might add. The new final boss with the end will continuously regain its health bar and you won't know why. I've watched 4 people play this and be stuck for over half an hour not knowing what you're supposed to do. The boss giving you a plethora of attacks like Psy looping and this flashy cutscene move, but none of it does anything. There's a near endless amount of attacks from both the player and the end, and all of it is moot because all you need to do is just switch targets mid-combo, target the cord controlling the mech, and once it's destroyed you'll tear the boss apart in under 90 seconds. It was just so poorly conveyed that it boggled the mind, alongside huge issues like trees blocking your view of the action. But hey, I did really like the I'm Here remix for the new final boss, that was pretty dope. But then they also retconned the ending of the game. Before, Sage sacrificed herself to destroy the end while she was piloting Supreme, and Eggman is seen in the post-credit scene bringing her AI back to life. But I guess because they didn't want to have to spend time in another game explaining her coming back to life at all, they just changed it to where that never happened to begin with. I feel like the original ending, for Sage at least, makes more sense. Her doing something for the greater good seems like a more satisfactory ending than nothing at all, to where I feel like Eggman and Sage don't really contribute much to the plot as it stands now, but I guess this is the new canon ending of the story, I think, but only time will tell on that. But really, that's all I've got to say on this game. As has been evidenced by the last 20 or so minutes, I just don't like Sonic Frontiers. This wasn't a project I relished the idea of making because at this point, since my opinion on the game is basically identical to what it was before, arguably worse in some areas, I just felt like I was picking on the game that a lot of people seem to really like. But I thought it was something worth doing nonetheless because a lot of people really wanted to know where I stood with Sonic Frontiers a year later, and now everyone knows. I don't really have much else to add on it since I don't find this to be an appealing game at its core. To everyone who hoped and or expected that things would be different now, I'm really sorry, this game isn't for me. What I often hear described as a major leap forward for Sonic is a game I think is far behind a plethora of other contemporary and older games that I think are way better. It just kind of gets to the point where I wonder how much of a place I really have in the discourse surrounding Sonic these days, because I've said my piece. Sonic Generations was the last officially released Sonic game that I thought was a fantastic game, and that was 12 years ago. In the time since, Sonic Mania is the only Sonic game I thought was anything more than decent at best, and while that was a nearly perfect game in terms of how it was made, it just never did much for me as I've gone into before. For me, Sonic is still something I follow because of fan works like Project 06 or Triple Trouble 16-bit, and I'd like to keep talking about those kinds of games. Those games and other fan works show me how much fun I can still have with this franchise when the official games just leave me feeling very little. If people want to keep hearing my thoughts on the official games, I can keep giving them, but I'm also not one to enjoy being a party pooper. So I imagine the amount of videos I have on this subject will probably decrease. But that is also a matter where only time will tell. In the meantime, I want to focus my attention on things I do really enjoy talking about, whether it be positive or negative, in the coming months. So I hope people join in for that. That's all I gotta say for this game. So as always, I'll conclude by saying this. I thank everyone for being with me on this Sonic journey these last 5.5 years, and I will see you next time.